While the shooting of an unarmed black teenager has raised questions about race relations, the sight of police dressed in camouflage and body armor alongside armored vehicles has also raised concerns about the militarization of law enforcement. Later, we'll talk with the former head of the New York City Police Department. But we begin in Ferguson, Missouri with correspondent Jay Gray. And Jay, police have been releasing more information about what happened, about the death of that teenager. What have they been saying?
Yeah, Anand, always good to talk to you. And let me tell you, the situation here in Ferguson changing dramatically. Take a look behind me. You can see the community gathering here once again after the chief of police in this city released the name of the police officer involved in details about the day 18-year-old Michael Brown was killed. This is something that this angry and grieving community has been pushing for since the shooting, and they got the information today. That officer, Darren Wilson, a 6-year veteran of the department, has never had any disciplinary action, and we learned today from the chief that he was apparently injured Saturday as all of this was taking place, the confrontation with Brown, and was treated for that injury. Now, the protesters here really amped up at this point. We see people continuing to drive by, honking their horns, and like I said, people pouring into this area. So it's really escalated things here, really ratcheted up the intensity of what's going on. There's also information in this investigation that's been released. We have now learned that police say Michael Brown was involved in a strong-arm robbery of a convenience store just before his confrontation with Officer Wilson. And the police department has released videotape that they say shows Brown stealing the cigars and confronting the shop owner inside the convenience store. That happened just minutes before a police dispatch was sent to all patrol officers giving a description of the suspect in this case, and that's when Wilson happened upon Brown in the street here. So a lot of new details, a lot of things changing, a very fluid situation, and this community responding as they have over the last several days, Anand.
Jay, you've been there since day one, and there were violent demonstrations on the first 3 nights. Yeah. Then it calmed down. There was a peaceful demonstration on Thursday night with the police even marching with protesters. And as you say, tensions are still running high. Is there still a big police presence in that area?
Yeah, there's absolutely a police presence here, and it's intensified as the crowd has grown here. Look, last night, there were hundreds of protesters in the street here, calm but not quiet. They were very vocal about what's going on here and demanding that this investigation be open and transparent. There was a change in strategy from police and a change in the leadership on the ground. The head of the highway patrol for this region, Captain Ron Johnson, who lives in Ferguson, has lived here for some time, was assigned by the governor to be in charge of security in this city. He says he understands what's going on here. He knows the people who live here. He was actually out marching with a lot of these citizens last night, along with some of his officers, and it really seemed to instill some hope. It seemed to make the citizens here believe that at some point now they are being listened to. So there was an almost festive atmosphere, if you can believe it, last night during the protest. All of that seems to be changing right now with the release of this new information today.
And Jay, one other issue that's getting the headlines as well, and that is the massive show of police force since day one, since the first night of those demonstrations, people talking about the militarization of the police force. What are you hearing about that? And is that provoking the crowd there?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the people who live in this community would tell you that's one of the things that has really ramped up the frustration here. They had officers in riot gear. They had officers in tactical uniforms on these armored vehicles rushing into the community at certain points during the confrontation, firing tear gas or flashbangs. They shot rubber bullets at one time. So it was very intense, very violent at times. And the first order from Captain Johnson as he took over control of security here was to call all of the officers in and tell them point blank, put away the riot gear, put away your gas mask. That's not how we're going to do this anymore. And then as I talked about, they got into the community yesterday. He was here as the new information was released. He heard everything that happened here. He talked with members of the community. He understands that things have intensified, but he tells us that he believes this community, his community, will get past this latest twist in the ongoing controversy.
Jay, very briefly, when we look at Ferguson, Missouri, and the relationship between the community there and the police, has it always been poor, or was there a good relationship at some time?
You know, and I'll step out of the way so you can again see what's going on here as more people move in, some with signs, others without. In this community, in Ferguson and the areas around here, there has been a tenuous relationship between the police and the neighborhoods here. Look, when this first happened, when Michael Brown was shot and it came to light, also brought to the attention of people around the country and around the world was the fact that this is a predominantly African-American community, the city predominantly African-American, but the 53 officers on the police force here in Ferguson, only 3 of those are African-American. So while these protests center on the idea that Michael Brown was killed, he was unarmed and shot, some say while he was raising his hands and doing what the officers were asking, it is also deep-rooted in the idea that there's always been this tension between the community and the police department, and there hasn't been what they would call fair representation. And again, that's something that Captain Johnson here says he understands because he's been a part of this community, because he's lived here, and he's heard from so many people here who have dealt with that for so many years. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out when you add into the equation the idea that the name of the officer was released today, but also these photos and videos of what police say is Michael Brown stealing cigars from a convenience store and assaulting the clerk before he met up with Officer Wilson.
Okay, thanks, Jay. That is correspondent Jay Gray talking to us from Ferguson in Missouri.